Today on the Emmanuel Pulpit.
Now, you and I are not Evel Knievel, and you may never attempt a 141-foot jump. But I will tell you, far more damage has been done by people jumping to conclusions.
With confidence in the authority and sufficiency of the Word of God, here's the Emmanuel Pulpit and Pastor Mike Stone.
The story in this chapter has several key aspects. In fact, there is indeed a tremendous series of sermons in Joshua chapter 22 alone. Next Sunday evening, Lord willing, I intend to preach at least one more message from this 22nd chapter. And if my memory and my notes serve me correctly, it will be the only time that I have really drilled down in one particular chapter in this study of Joshua and just tarried for a few moments. There are at least three messages that we could find if we just very broadly outlined this text tonight. In Joshua chapter 22, for example, there's a story about the danger of complacency. The 2.5 tribes, the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh, which Bible students will call the Transjordanian tribes because they lived across the Jordan, Transjordan. These 2.5 Transjordanian tribes settled in, settled down, and settled for less than God's best. Don't listen to the message tonight and think they are the heroes. They are not. There's a message here about the danger of complacency. Closely connected, there's a story here about the danger of compromise. We will see in the message tonight, these Transjordanian tribes are not guilty of the idolatrous motive of which they are accused, but they are not totally innocent of the insidious sin of compromise. Living outside of the land of promise, across the Jordan, beyond the border of the promises of God. They represent modern-day believers, and if we're honest, there's a little bit of this in each of us, willing to live just close enough to be considered the people of God, but far enough away to not be constrained by His boundaries. There is in Joshua 22 a message about the danger of complacency. There's a message about the danger of compromise, but I want us to consider tonight a message about the danger of conflict. When the 22nd chapter begins, all is well, but something happens in the nation of Israel that takes the people of God to the brink of civil war. And interestingly enough, it involves an altar. It involves an issue of worship. Baptist brothers and sisters, it involves an issue between brothers and sisters of the faith. Emmanuel Baptist Church, I want you to lean into this text tonight and listen to a word of warning. If Satan cannot defeat the people of God with war, he will divide the people of God over worship. But what we have here tonight is more than a worship war over stylistic preferences between old songs sung from a hymnal in the hand versus modern worship songs sung from the lyrics on the screen. What we have here tonight is much more important than the foolish debate as to whether or not we should wear dresses and skirts for the ladies or suits and ties for the men when we come to the house of God. What we have here tonight is an accusation of idolatry which, if true, could potentially bring the wrath of God down on the entire nation. Now, my purpose in this message tonight is really not to determine the rightness or the wrongness of the construction of this altar. We will look at that at a later time, most likely next week. Listen very carefully. I think it's very important tonight in this lesson that we leave that question unanswered, even though it is a critically important one. Because at the end of the day, there are biblical principles for conflict resolution that need to be and under God must be practiced, whether you are the one in the right or the one in the wrong. Now, I know you're a simple people, so could I simplify what I just said? Just because you're on the side of right does not mean you can act like a jerk. Did you understand that a little easier? There are biblical principles of conflict resolution, whether you're the one in the right or the one in the wrong. So for tonight, we're just going to drop a pin right here in the text. We'll revisit the issue of guilt or innocence at a later time. But our question tonight is quite simple and singular. Right or wrong, how are we to resolve conflict? Now, I want to give you a 3-point outline for those of you that love the 3-point outlines, as does your pastor. I'm going to give you an outline and a running commentary on the text, and then at our conclusion, I'll share with you 5 biblical principles that we need to keep in mind when resolving conflict. Note with me in verses 1 through 9, we just read the text, so we'll not labor here long, the surprising record of the conflict. It seems to come out of nowhere. You know, it's that way with the people of God. It's that way with individual relationships. It's that way in a home. It's that way in a family. It's that way in a Sunday school class. It's that way in a ministry. It's that way in a church. Things can be going extremely well, and like a sucker punch from hell, you can get sideswiped by the devil. I heard just this week about what I believe to be one of the strongest churches in our Southern Baptist Convention. And I heard this week at a Georgia Baptist Committee meeting about how several hundred people left that congregation in the last few weeks because of a relatively minor change. The church was experiencing great things for God, and out of nowhere came the surprising record and report of conflict. Listen carefully. Conflict will come when you least expect it. Because when you least expect it, you're least prepared. Things are going great for the nation of Israel. And I want to show you 3 aspects of what was happening in the land. And I'm going to go very quickly tonight. First, note in verse 1, it was a time of peace. The land has been settled. The boundaries have been laid out. The inheritances have been allotted. We have seen all of the tribes within the banks of the Jordan. They have received their land allotment. They have moved in. They have possessed it. We see that Caleb has been given his promised mountainside allotment. We see that the cities of refuge have been laid out. We see that the Levitical cities have been assigned. It was a time of great peace. And Joshua notes to these 2.5 Transjordanian tribes, you have kept your promise. You remember as they made their pilgrimage into the promised land, they requested of Moses land on the outside of Canaan, on the other side of the Jordan River. And when it came time to enter the promised land, Joshua charged them and said, you're not going to have peace back on this side of the Jordan unless you're willing to go into the land and fight with your brothers, and you can't come back outside the land of Canaan until all of the land is at rest. And that's where we find the nation of Israel in Joshua 22. It was a time of peace. It was also, as I just noted, a time of partnership. They had been working together, side by side, shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm. If they were an army today, they were marching in lockstep. They had the heartbeat and the cadence of brothers in arms, of a family that was fighting the fight of faith to be pleasing to God. It was a time of peace. It was a time of partnership. Note, thirdly, it was a time of prosperity. When Joshua blesses them and sends them back across the Jordan, notice that he tells them in verse 8, on your way back, he says, you need to go with some great riches. We've got a lot of the spoils of war from all the head knocking with the Canaanites. We've got some houses we didn't build. We've got some cities we did not construct. We've got land we did not till. We've got wells that we did not dig. We've got all kind of bountiful blessings here in the land of promise. Now, you can't pick up a vineyard and take it with you. You can't pick up a house and take it with you. You can't take the well and haul it off with you, but what you can do, stop by the storehouse and get some of the gold and the silver and the bronze, and take for yourself some of the livestock and all of the clothing. God has blessed us. Brothers, it was a time of peace, partnership, and prosperity. And I want to say this again. You are never more ripe for a divisive move of the devil. I'm talking about conflict in your life, in your home, in your workplace, or in your church. You're never more ripe for it than when things are going well. May I take a moment as your pastor and share just a word of announcement and application for you? For the last several years, our church family, the leadership, has been talking about the construction of a new building. For years, we've been talking about a new fellowship hall and revised children's space. If you've been attending our business meetings and have paid attention to the budget, every year we've been setting aside money from our church budget into a building fund, in part because we need more space, in part because the world has changed in regards to security issues, that where our children worship right now, where they are instructed, there are more than a dozen points of entry and exit into that building. Emmanuel Baptist Church, we are living as a congregation in a time of peace, partnership, and prosperity. But if we are not on guard, there is just ahead of us the potential for conflict. Now, I know there's a potential for conflict because there's going to be a time of change. And the older I get, I don't like change. How about you? I don't even like change in my pocket, to tell you the truth. We have had an unprecedented season of peace and partnership and prosperity. I hope it's that way in your own individual life. But I will tell you this, on the authority of the Word of God and based on my own personal experience, the devil is willing to wait. He's willing to wait until everything seems to be going well. And then all of a sudden, here comes conflict. Paul wrote to the Corinthians and said, we're not ignorant of Satan's devices. We'd say it like this: we know the devil's playbook. And as your head coach, if you please, I just want to let you know the plays that he's going to run so the defense can get ready and be prepared to fight against that sneak attack from the enemy. Some of you enjoy deer hunting, as your pastor does. And you know that if that trophy buck can smell you, if he knows you're there, you'll rarely know that he's there. That's why you put on camouflage. That's why you spray yourself down with scent cover or other things that I won't even mention tonight. You want him to think there's no danger. All the while you're setting your crosshairs on his vitals. Brothers and sisters, Satan is an excellent marksman and a skilled adversary. He will lull you, he will lull me, he will lull us into ease while he readies himself to squeeze off a shot. The surprising record of conflict. Here's the context. Everything's going great when all of a sudden conflict comes. Note with me not only the surprising record of the conflict, but the simple reasons for the conflict. You don't have to have a PhD in interpersonal relationships to understand the outline of what happened that led from peace to conflict. There are three things that I want you to notice. In verse 10, for example, there is an unexplained action. These 2.5 tribes begin making their way back across the Jordan River, and for reasons we don't know right now, they stop just inside Canaan, and they build a large altar. At this point in the text, we don't know why, but listen to me, friend, at this point in the text, neither do the other 10 tribes. Now, we will see more fully next week that what these 2.5 tribes did was not exactly a good thing, but even still, I can't be dogmatic and say that it was a wicked thing, but I can say that it was not a wise thing. Why is that? They did something controversial and didn't let anybody else know what was going on. Lean in close, listen carefully now. Sometimes our actions or inactions can reasonably cause a person to question what we have done. For example, just within our own congregation, if you drove up here next week and there were concrete trucks out on the property pouring footers and laying a foundation, you'd have reason to be upset. You'd have reason to be troubled. You'd have reason to question and say, what in the world are they doing? Because nobody communicated with you what and why. In my ministry in this church, there have been times that I have received questions and criticisms about what I was doing, and I have to be very honest with you. There are more than a handful of times those criticisms were justified, because I had not taken the time to explain. Now, you don't need to hone up on these skills to pastor a church, but an unexplained action on your part can cause conflict in your relationships as well. For example, if your mother finds out on Facebook that you've sold your house and are moving to the country, that's not going to go well. Sir, if your wife learns about your new pickup truck on Twitter. Young people, if your parents find out about an award you got at school when they read about it in the Blackshear Times or the Waycross Journal-Herald, it's going to be a cold night around your house. Years ago, when I was a senior in college, my parents were living in Macon and I was living in Valdosta, finishing up at Valdosta State, and I worked mornings and weekends at a local country radio station. I came in early one Saturday morning to do the weekend news report, and the disc jockey off the air said, well, what'd you do last night? And I said, well, my fiance and I set the date. We had been engaged. Everybody in our family knew that we were engaged. I said, we set the date. So this is probably about 6:30 in the morning. He opens the microphone, says it's time for the 6:30 weekend news. Mike Stone's in the newsroom, but Mike, before you get to the local news, I understand you've got some news. I understand you and your fiancé have set the date. I said, yes, we did. Just after that news report ended, the strobe light of the telephone lit up in the control room. It was my mother. She was not happy at all about learning about my wedding date along with the rest of the world. Surely these 2.5 tribes bear some responsibility for not communicating what was going on. Wherever there is a lack of information, the devil will be all too willing to fill in the blanks with the most unflattering answer and cause your friends and family to assume the very worst. And that's what happens here. There's not only an unexplained action, there is in verse 11 what I've called an unkind assumption. The sons of Israel heard it, verse 11, and they said, behold, these 2.5 tribes have built an altar. They built it on our side in the region of the Jordan. They built it on our land. And we know, according to the next verse, they begin to sharpen up their swords for battle. They are fit to be tied. It's an ancient rumor mill. And have you noticed that the rumor mill never grinds out good news? The rumor mill always grinds out and reports out the very worst and the most unkind assumptions. Let's be very honest tonight, that's in our nature to assume the worst. Beloved, when I say it's in our nature, I mean it's in our sin nature. Our dear friend, Brother Don Hattaway, is perhaps the most gifted believer that I know in constantly cautioning those around him, including myself, don't jump to a conclusion. You need to get all of the information. Last night I was watching a CNN presentation on the 60s, and this one particular episode was about 1968. And they started off that show about 1968 with a tragic event that happened on New Year's Eve, 1967. They showed the film of a famous stunt by daredevil Evel Knievel. How many of you know Evel Knievel? Could I get a witness from my generation tonight? Knievel was to jump the fountains at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, a span of 141 feet. But he crashed. He crushed his pelvis, he crushed his femur, he broke his hip, broke his wrist, broke both ankles, and suffered a severe concussion that kept him in ICU for nearly a month. Now, you and I are not Evel Knievel, and you may never attempt a 141-foot jump. But I will tell you, far more damage has been done by people jumping to conclusions. Proverbs 25 and verse 8 declares, "Do not go out hastily to argue your case, else what will you do when your neighbor humiliates you?" That is, don't jump to a conclusion and then go out and try to make your case, because you might get embarrassed when somebody says you don't have all the story. They begin to fill in the blanks of the story, and it's exactly the opposite of the way you had assumed. There is biblical admonition against assuming the worst about people. You and I have been known to say, let's be honest, I can tell you why they did it. Well, you can try, but you're liable to be wrong about as often as you're right. It's a shot in the dark. It's a stab into the unknown. You don't know what's in your own heart, much less what's in somebody else's heart. Now, this principle necessarily means that when you're trying to resolve conflict, you need to go in asking questions, not bringing accusations, and we'll talk about that more in just a moment. But simply put, to avoid an embarrassing fall, don't stand on the edge of a rumor and jump to a conclusion. You can tweet that. There's an unexplained action. There's an unkind assumption. That leads very naturally to an unwise accusation. They're going to war, and as we will see in the balance of this chapter, they're doing it because they accuse these 2.5 tribes of idolatry in the presence of God. Maybe you heard about the man's truck that was parked in front of a lady's house in the church. It had broken down there. The church gossip went by and told him, said, "There's a rumor going around that you're carrying on with this woman. Your truck has been seen parked in her driveway all through the night." And he said, "Ma'am, please don't think that about me. My truck is just broken down." And she said, "Well, it doesn't matter. People are going to assume the worst about you." And so he pulled the truck over and parked it in front of her house for a few days. An unwise accusation. God taught me this lesson in a powerful way years ago in the old sanctuary. In fact, I was preaching in one of our 3 morning services, and there was a man sitting there, and he frowned and grimaced and made faces the whole time. And Andrea asked me after that service, how'd that service go? And I said, "Well, it went well, but man, there was one guy here, man, he is ticked at me. I'm going to hear from him tomorrow." I didn't tell her who it was. But sure enough, the secretary buzzed my office Monday morning. First thing, it's Brother So-and-so on the phone, and I tensed up. I got ready. I'm ready. I'm loaded for bear. Only to hear him say, "Pastor, pray for me. I've got this major medical condition going on. I really shouldn't have even been at church yesterday. I was so uncomfortable the whole morning. But I just wanted to be in church with my brothers and sisters and hear you preach." And I thought, amen. I'd made an assumption. And though I did not name him by God's grace, I made a very unwise accusation. Do you see it in the text? One group does something nobody else understands. They jump to a conclusion, and in this case, they begin running their mouth, wagging their fingers, and sharpening their swords. There's the surprising record of the conflict, the simple reasons for the conflict. Lastly, the spiritual remedies to the conflict. As simple as the reasons are, the remedies are equally easy to understand. In verses 13 through 20, note with me first a private conversation. Verse 13, and the sons of Israel sent to the sons of Reuben, the sons of Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh into the land of Gilead, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, and with him 10 chiefs, one chief for each father's household from each of the tribes of Israel, and each one of them was the head of his father's household among the thousands of Israel. What they do is they decide, rather than the whole nation going to war, let's send an envoy of leadership. We'll send in the high priest and one representative of all of the remaining tribes. But I want you to notice what this somewhat private conversation sounds like. Verse 16. Thus says the whole congregation of the Lord. We'd say it like this. You know what folks are saying? Everybody's saying this, guys. Here's what the whole congregation of Israel says, verse 16. What is this unfaithful act which you have committed against the God of Israel, turning away from following the Lord this day by building yourselves an altar to rebel against the Lord this day? Is not the iniquity of Peor enough for us? They're recounting times that Israel embarked on idolatry in the past and brought about the judgment and the wrath of God. Is not the iniquity of Peor enough for us, from which we have not cleansed ourselves to this day? In other words, we hadn't gotten over that yet, although a plague came on the congregation of the Lord, that you must turn away this day from following the Lord. If you rebel against the Lord today, He will be angry with the whole congregation of Israel tomorrow. If, however, the land of your possession is unclean, then cross into the land of possession of the Lord, where the Lord's tabernacle stands. Pay very close attention to that. And take possession among us. Only do not rebel against the Lord or rebel against us by building an altar for yourselves besides the altar of the Lord our God. Verse 20, did not Achan the son of Zerah, do you remember Achan at the battle of Jericho, took some of the accursed thing, brought judgment upon the whole nation and death to his household? Did not Achan the son of Zerah act unfaithfully in the things under the ban, and wrath fell on all the congregation of Israel, and that man did not perish alone in his iniquity? Here's what they come and they said. You apparently have forgotten how God works. God pours out wrath on idolatry on everybody around that situation. You have built an idolatrous altar to God. You're not even across the Jordan before you've already built this rebellious place of worship. You intend to offer blood sacrifices here instead of crossing the Jordan and going to the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, which at that time was a place at Shiloh. You have built yourself an altar here. You're rebelling against God, and now the wrath of God is going to come down on all of us. That's why we have made up our mind we're going to kill you. Better that we kill you than God have to kill all of us. Now, as wrong as they were in their assumptions, at least they cared enough to go to the source. Here's a good principle of conflict resolution. If you can't speak to them, stop speaking about them. The private conversation. Note now what I believe may be one of the most critical points in this resolution, and that is the patient explanation. Verse 21. And the sons of Reuben, the sons of Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh answered and spoke to the heads of the family of Israel. Now listen to their answer. The mighty one, God, the Lord. The mighty one, God, the Lord. He knows, and may Israel itself know, if it was in rebellion or if an unfaithful act against the Lord, do not save us this day. If we have built us an altar to turn away from following the Lord, or if to offer a burnt offering or grain offering on it, or if to offer sacrifices of peace offerings on it, may the Lord Himself require it. No, here's what they're saying. If we're guilty of what you're accusing us of, we pray that God would kill us all today, and if He needs to use your swords of war to do it, may God strike us dead if we're guilty of that which you have accused us. Verse 24. But truly, we have done this out of concern for a reason, saying, in time to come, your sons may say to our sons, what have you to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? For the Lord has made the Jordan a border between us and you sons of Reuben and you sons of Gad. You have no portion in the Lord. so your sons may make our sons stop fearing the Lord. Therefore we said, let us build an altar, not for burnt offering or for sacrifice. In other words, you've got this thing all wrong. Rather, verse 27, it shall be a witness between us and you, and between our generations after us, that we are to perform the service of the Lord before Him with our burnt offerings and with our sacrifices and with our peace offerings, so that your sons will not say to our sons in time to come, you have no portion in the Lord. Therefore we said, it shall also come about that if they say to this to us or to our generations in time to come, then we shall say to them, see, the copy of the altar of the Lord which our fathers made, not for burnt offering or for sacrifice, rather it is a witness between us and you. Far be it from us that we should rebel against the Lord and turn away from following the Lord this day by building an altar for burnt offering, grain offering, or for sacrifice, besides the altar of the Lord our God, which is before His tabernacle. They're offering a patient explanation. Notice that they did not blow up. They didn't cuss them out. They didn't call the law. They listened and responded. There is, I believe, a very beautiful implication here. That is, while the 10 tribes inside Canaan were assuming the very worst about them, they are in essence assuming the very best about their accusers. We're assuming by this patient explanation that you love us. We're assuming this is brought about not by a lack of love or a lack of concern, but by a lack of information. If the problem were a lack of love, I would blast you. If the problem were a lack of appreciation, I would remind you of all the stuff we've done for you. They say, in essence, we believe there's a lack of information here. May we explain our side of the story. There's the private conversation, the patient explanation, and then in verses 30 to 34 is the possible reconciliation. These closing verses tell of how the explanation they gave was pleasing to this group of leaders, and they went back to the rest of the nation of Israel. And in verse 33, the word pleased the sons of Israel, and the sons of Israel blessed God, and they did not speak of going up against them in war to destroy the land in which the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad were living. And the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad called the altar Witness. For they said, it is a witness between us that the Lord is God. Now, even though there are going to be disastrous implications for the future, the matter as for now is resolved and there is peace. I want to give you one little footnote and then 5 quick principles. The foolish way in which these 10 tribes dealt with the conflict prevented them from dealing with the root issue. I'm going to say that again. The foolish way in which they dealt with the conflict prevented them from dealing with the root issue. Even these Transjordanian tribes, according to their own testimony, according to their own explanation, are acknowledging that living where we have chosen to live, outside of the land of promise, is going to cause trouble for our future generations. But rather than taking the time to deal with the root issue, now they're dealing with the conflict itself. There's a lesson for us in this tonight. In fact, 5 of them that I want to share with you briefly. 5 lessons about conflict resolution we can take away from this chapter. Number 1, begin with reputation and not with rumor. When the tribes inside Canaan first heard about this altar that they deemed to be pagan and idolatrous, rather than acting based upon rumor, it would have behooved them to have said, these guys just lost a lot of their kinsmen helping us fight for this land. Why, the blood on our blades is still warm. We've just conquered Canaan with their help. This kind of idolatry doesn't sound like them. Now, they may be guilty of it because none of us is immunized from sin. None of us is exempt from temptation, but we need to go approach them with the assumption that there's more to the story because this idolatry doesn't sound like them. The best illustration of this comes from the ministry of our former pastor. Not long after I became the pastor of this church, there was a death in the community, and I went to make a funeral call and to touch base with that family. And one of the grieving family members in that home said, "I'll never go to Emmanuel Baptist Church because the former pastor there, they called Brother Don Hadaway by name, told me that I could not attend that church because one of my children had been divorced." No, ma'am. That's not why I'm here. I'm just here to pray for you and to pray for your family. And she said, "Well, I'm not going, and that's why." And I just couldn't take it. Maybe it was my naivety and being a novice, having a little more heat than light. No, ma'am, he didn't say that. "You don't know, you weren't there." I said, "I didn't have to be there. I know Don Hadaway." He didn't say that. Now, with conflict resolution, begin by considering that person's reputation, especially if they've got a reputation for serving God. Start with the assumption there's more to the story than that. Begin with reputation and not with rumor. Number 2, lead with praise and not problems. I think one of the things that led to this conflict was the first thing out of their mouth. "We want you to know what everybody's saying. How in the world could you have done this treacherous thing against God?" Well, it's nice to see you too. How much better might it have gone if it had started off something like this? "First of all, Reuben, we want you to know we love you. We can't begin to express how much we appreciate all the help you gave us in the recently concluded war. In fact, we don't think y'all packed up enough of the spoils of war when you came across the Jordan. We've got several mules and camels outside. We brought some more stuff with us." When you sit down to confront someone about conflict, it's nice to start with some praise and not get right into the problem. Now, let me give you something that I think you ought not say, because this sounds like praise and not a problem, but I believe it. I believe this is not very wise. "Now, you know I love you." "Preacher, you know I wouldn't hurt." "Honey, I wouldn't hurt you for anything." Well, I got a feeling you're about to. But start with some words of praise. Think of something for which you can give gratitude for that person about. Principle number 3. Try to ask and not accuse. What if they had gone to these tribes and said, "What I heard does not sound like you. There is a rumor going around, and I want you to know I don't believe it unless I hear it from you. Is there another side to this story?" Here's a phrase you ought to write down. You ought to put this in your personal lexicon. You ought to lead with a question like this: "Can you help me understand blank? Can you help me understand this particular situation? I know someone who loves the Lord like you. There's got to be more to this story. Could you please try to help me understand?" Principle number 4, just moving quickly: fight the foe and not your family. I know the Bible says faithful are the wounds of a friend, and they are, and every one of us, if we live long enough, need to receive the faithful wound of somebody that loves us enough to confront us in our sin. But I want to encourage you tonight, save the sharpest arrows for the enemy. You football players, save the hardest blow for the guys wearing the other jersey. Israel is going to face generations of trouble because they did not rid the promised land of the pagan tribes. Earlier in this series, we had a message about the deception of partial obedience. They let remnants of the Canaanites and the other pagan tribes stay in the land. I'm saying tonight, if they had been concerned about rooting out idolatry in the place where they lived, rather than spending all their time fighting their own kin people about what they thought was idolatry in their life, they would not have had the trouble in the generations to come. And you may not know it, but I've just described the average Southern Baptist church. If we would spend as much time on our face fighting the devil in prayer before God and fighting hell with the proclamation of God's Word and pushing back the forces of darkness by old-fashioned soul winning and trying to lead people to Jesus as the average Baptist church member spends on the phone running their fellow church Sunday school members down, if we'd spend as much time fighting the devil as we spend fighting one another, we wouldn't have the problem in the American church that we have today. This past week, I was telling our son Matthew the story of Gideon defeating the Midianites. It was a story in one of the little children's Bible story books. He thought it was quite strange that when they blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers, that all of the Midianites thought they were surrounded by thousands and thousands, and the Bible says that they turned their swords on one another and started killing one another. He thought that was rather strange. It is rather strange when the people of God, Christians within the same family, turn their swords on one another. Dear sir, dear ma'am, what if you spent time fighting the devil instead of fighting your spouse, your kids, your parents, your siblings? One last principle: respond with reconciliation, not retaliation. Notice how these 2.5 Transjordanian tribes did not respond. You remember the accusation? Then there's the explanation. Then there's the apology. Oh, I'm sorry, we jumped to a conclusion. Bless God, yes you did. Don't you ever come back over here on our property, pointing your finger at us, telling us off. I'm not going to put up with it anymore. No. Their goal was not retaliation, but reconciliation. You ever had a relationship with anybody that it was hard to apologize to them? I want you to know I'm sorry. You ought to be. When someone wants to reconcile with you, listen, beloved, let them. Respond with reconciliation, not retaliation. I heard an interesting example just this past week of what happens when two individuals kind of go head to head in the same family, in the same ministry, in the same church, in the same community. The illustration is of two mountain goats. We might call them rams. And man, they can stand up on the side of almost a sheer mountainside. And they can walk down these little precipitous little pathways. I mean, just about this wide. Just one little foothold on the side of a mountain. And the story is of what happens when one ram is coming down that little pathway and another ram is climbing the mountain going up that pathway. What do when they meet? God in His infinite wisdom has placed it within their own natural instincts. One of them will get down low to the ground and let the other one walk over him. Isn't that what the Lord Jesus did for us? He who was perfect and sinless and blameless, who had never done anything wrong, knew that we needed reconciliation with God. We were at odds with God and could not get to Him. We were so at odds with God, we didn't even want to get with Him. But Jesus Christ laid down His life voluntarily, providing a way that through Him, through His sacrifice, through His blood, we can be reconciled to our God. And now He commands us to go out and make reconciliation with others. I close with this thought. Could it be that the conflict that God has allowed into your life and into your family, your workplace, your circumstance, could it be that God has allowed that to happen because there are some people around that situation who need to see a living, breathing example of what it means to be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you.
You've been listening to the Emmanuel Pulpit, the broadcast ministry of Pastor Mike Stone, Senior Pastor of Emmanuel Baptist Church in Blackshear, Georgia. With confidence in the authority and sufficiency of the Word of God, Pastor Mike is committed to walking you verse by verse through books of the Bible. We pray this message has been an encouragement to you as you seek to learn and live the Word of God. Free audio downloads of this message, as well as general contact information, are available through our website at ebchurch.net. Thanks for joining us for today's message from the Emmanuel Pulpit.